I picked up this Ableton Adventure bike, and it's very similar to like most other e-bikes, I would guess, you know, with the rear hub drive and all that. And I took it out and I beat it pretty hard the other day. I took it off the trail, let's put it that way, but I wasn't going over logs or anything like that. I was just kind of driving it in smoother, you know, across fields and things like that. And I looked at this tire. Now the tire's flat. I've only taken it out 3 times. I've only taken it out maybe 3 times. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's completely flat. I put some of this in it to no avail. I pumped it up. I thought I was good. I came back the next day and it was sure enough flat again. So I did order another inner tube. I did do some research on inner tubes to try to get the best one. And I did find, I didn't realize, like any other thing you get into, you're learning as you go sometimes. And that's kind of why I'm shooting this video. I just want you guys to see that these tires, I think there's different grades of tires, and my guess is that maybe Ableton cut some corners and put a low grade tube in here. I thought it was my fault, and it still could be, but when I get this out, when I get this apart, I'm going to take it and look at the inside of it and see if there's any sharp objects protruding. I can't find anything on the outside of this tire that looks like, you know, that looks like it should be, that, you know, got into the tire. So I don't see anything. I've looked all around. My guess is it could have just been a bad tube, because I'm sure that happens. So word to the wise, just have a spare tube on hand, have a way to pump it up. I don't know if I have my little air compressor. I have a little portable air compressor. I don't have it with me, but you can get them. They're not very big and they're easy to put into a bike, you know, for your for your safety, or for your protection, or more or less for your, to be able to keep your bike in shape if you have a flat. Scratch that. It's great to have extra supplies on hand just in case. You never know what you're going to run into. And luckily, this tube that went out on the front wheel, and had it been on the back wheel, it might have been a little more involved. Not a whole lot more involved, but a little bit more. So but yeah, I ended up getting the Mongoose tubes. I got 2 of them, and I'm debating on whether I want to change the back one, but since I'm cheap, I'll probably just drive it on the back one until the back one goes, and keep the other one as a spare, because I did get 2 of these. I am not in any way endorsing this company. It was just that they seem to be a very good tube. They're very well supported, and a lot of people liked this tube, this type of tube, so this make of tube. So I will let you know as we go. I'm going to begin the process here. So I'm a bit of an improvisationist, and I just kind of use whatever I have. I made sure this garage door bracket was fairly able to support the weight of this bike. I have the battery out of the bike, so it's about 20 pounds lighter. And I didn't have to tie it up really high. I just tied it around the frame. You don't really have to pull it up very much. That's just enough to get the wheel off there. So we'll discuss putting the wheel back on, which might be a bit more of a challenge as we go on. Although I didn't have a lot of trouble putting it on, you know, when it was new. So yeah, we're gonna see how this works out. I'm gonna get this wheel off. So this company did not give me a pair of plastic tools, pry tools, and I mean, I have pry tools, and other than damaging the tire by prying too hard, probably the only issue would be installation. You know, if you're prying out a flat tube you don't plan to repair, which you could repair, but why repair an old cheap thin tube? I might as well just put a new tube in here. I have it supported on a cardboard box, and there's the tube there, so I'm going to start the process. So you can see what I've done here is I've taken what I call my anchor screwdriver. It's a pretty long screwdriver for my screwdriver set. And, you know, that was the initial. It's easy to pry them up when they're flat. And then I just walked around with the smaller screwdriver here. But one other thing I did is I put tape on the end of the screwdrivers that covers the end. That way, there's no chance of a puncture unless somebody gets extremely rammy. But yeah, so that's that process completed. And now all I have to do is check it out, get the tube out of here. So I'm pumping up the tube right now, the bad tube, because I'd kind of like to know what caused this leak. So I'm going to pump it up and leak test it. I gave this tube a leak test in my sink, which is a pretty good place for these things. I just filled my sink about halfway up and rolled it around. And there's where the leak was located. It was actually very, very small, but I just put my poker in there to mark where it is. And, you know, I can imagine probably get a leak repair kit and fix this and have a spare tube. It's hard to tell. I'm going to have to check the inside of the tube to see if there are sharp objects in the tube, or in the tire rather. But yeah, I'm just going to hang on to this tube, and I think I am going to patch that. I'm going to buy a patch kit, but only as an emergency. I'm going to put the better tube in and then keep this tube as a spare. So I put my headlamp on and I'm doing a little examination here of the tire by running my hand along the inside of it, and it is pretty much a new tire. And I felt a little wire sticking up. And of course, I'm not saying that this is the way you should do things, because there is a chance you could stick whatever it is in your finger when you're rubbing your hand along here. But me, I figure if it hurts me a little bit, I guess I'm not smart, I don't know, but to me, this is the best way by feel, because it's such a small thing. And it's actually such a small thing that the little bit of wire that I detected coming out of this tire was, I can't even find it again, but I felt it. It stuck my finger. But now going over the second time, I don't know if I bent it over or what happened, but I don't feel it. And I'm pretty sure, matter of fact, I'm about positive that they use wire in the manufacturing process on the insides of the tire. So I'm thinking that very possibly that's what it is. So I'm going to keep checking this out and roll this around and try to find this again. I did feel it the one time, but for some reason I don't know if I pushed it down or if it bent over or what, but I'm going to keep looking here to try to find the source of this. Strangest thing ever, I just wiped around this thing about 5 or 6 times with a very clean rag, and I used my hand to feel, and I rotated it maybe another 5 or 6 times, and I could not feel that wire that I felt the first time. So I don't know if it was debris laying in there that I managed to wipe out, because I cannot find a leak. I cannot find the wire that I felt. There was some very small debris in the tire, but not anything that I would have thought would have made a tire go flat. And the leak on the tube is on the traveling surface, so I would suspect that, you know, and it looked like a puncture, like a small puncture, because I don't think rubber just has minute holes in it for no reason. So apparently something punctured it. I'm going to wipe it out and reinflate it, put it back together and reinflate it, but I just don't understand. It's just odd, because I felt around, the leak was on the bottom of the tube, but I'm even feeling the sides of the tire, and I don't feel anything that feels like it would have caused this. Even though this leak was on the top, on the tread side of the tube. I'm checking the rim too, and it looks pretty good. I mean, they put Ableton puts a piece of, you know, heavy duty adhesive, some kind of a protector around the inside of the rim so that the spokes don't protrude and rub the tire and cause it to go flat. The only thing I've seen is right here where it connects, these edges. I'm going to have to try to give you a right angle here. The edges of where that tape is are a little bit sharp, but not really. I mean, I don't think that would actually cause a leak, because that's actually where the tire is seated, you know. So I don't think that would be a problem, because the tire is actually seated over this area. So yeah, once again, I don't know. I'm just going to put it back together, reinflate it, wipe the tire out, and we'll go from there. So you want to make sure that you feed your shredder up through, and I've already screwed the cap back on it so that it doesn't pull out. But when you're feeding your tube around, you want to make sure that that doesn't get pulled to an angle like that. You want to make sure that that is straight and all the way up through when you're finished, because it's just not good. It's working against itself otherwise. Before I seat that second bead around the tire, I'm going to just lightly blow up the inner tube. Not a lot of pressure, but just enough to pull out any wrinkles or kinks, because that's also a bad thing. If you have kinks in there when you inflate it up, that's not good. So I am going to check for that before I reseat that final bead around the tire. I was very surprised at how easy it was to reseat this other bead on this tire, even with a partially inflated tube. My experience has been, you know, the smaller bike tires. So definitely these fat tire bikes, the fat tires are, at least from my experience so far, are much easier to change the tubes in them. I'm going to inflate this to 12 psi. It says on the tire 5 to 15 psi. And I probably could go down as low as 10, because I ride these trails some pretty big bumps on some of these trails, but I'm going to go to 12. We'll see how that works out. Just one highlight, hindsight view / observation. If I were going to do this again, and I didn't put a lot of pressure on this tire, I mainly pushed on the corners of the box, you know, instead of pushing in the middle. But you could easily bend your brake rotor, or your brake, you know, that little rotor that's for your brakes. They can easily bend. So if I do this again, I'll turn that over. I did not bend it, I'm 99% sure, because I didn't put hardly any pressure on it at all. But that's just something to keep in mind. One other consideration is that these tread, even though these are not radial tires that are, you know, require, you know, a directional approach, the tread on these tires, if you look at it, the tread is pointing, kind of has a pointing in one direction. The tread is pointing in that direction. And since I put the tire back on the way I took it off, I know I'm okay, but it wouldn't be hard. It would be easy actually to put this on backwards. And so I don't know that it would be a huge thing if you did put it on backwards, but I think you would do better with that tread pointing the right way. Once again, I checked all the way around this tire, and I checked really well for anything that might have stuck in the tire, and I cannot find anything. So this is a bit of a mystery for me. That little wire that I felt must have been loose, because I never felt it again after going around that tire on the inside multiple times. So I would say it's kind of one of those things that's kind of a fluke. Not really, you know, even though I was pushing the bike hard, there's nothing in the tire, so I didn't run over anything. So yeah, it was internal. The leak was internal, and I think it must have been some debris in the tire from something. I think I already mentioned this in passing, but I'm going to say it one more time. in the video. But if you decide to tie your bike up the way I did, make sure you know how to make a good knot, and make sure you use heavy cord. Like this, I used a fairly nice heavy nylon cord here to tie that up. Try not to tie around any sharp edges, because things can you know, break that way. But no, I just don't want to see anybody get hurt, even though the bike's not that far up off the floor. If it were to fall, you know, that could hurt you. So I just want to make sure that I'm not recommending this method. I'm just saying this is what I did, and if you decide to do it, just be careful. Use a heavy cord. Know your knots. Make sure it's a knot you can untie too, like not something nobody's going to untie. Just tie a good knot, and make sure that, you know, there's safety things involved there. That's not the safest way. I mean, something could have happened and it could have hurt me. So the chances of that happening were very unlikely given the materials I used and the way I did it, but I am not recommending you do it that way. So if you decide to do this and you decide to do it that way, just be very careful. Reassembly was not really that much of a problem. I managed to pull it back up in there. These tires, believe it or not, the tires and the wheels are pretty light. They look heavy, but they really are not that heavy at all. I guess the 80 pounds of bike is mainly the battery and the motor, and you know, some of the frame, but I don't think that a lot of the weight is in the wheels, at least not the front wheel. Just a word of advice on lithium batteries. Now, I bought special protective bags, and I can put a link in my description, but they're made by FLASLD. I guess you say that, Flaslid, Flame Shield Warrior. And these bags have handles on them, which I liked. And there's little reflectors on them as well, which could come in handy if you're changing a battery, you know, and people need to see you. So I just think that's a nicely designed product, and it wasn't extremely expensive, and it could save, if there would ever be any kind of a, you know, a chain reaction inside of the battery that could cause a fire, this would save the fire from ever spreading any further. There's special flame retardant material inside of these things. And if you're going to ride an e-bike, I highly recommend. But a couple of more suggestions before my battery runs out here is that I would keep the batteries in a stable temperature environment. Now, I live in the northeast of the US, and we're having an unusually warm day today, but generally this time of the year we're below freezing or at freezing. So lithium batteries are typically okay as long as you keep them stable. And you know, if you push one really hard, if you're out in the summertime and it's warm already and you're pushing that thing, pushing the bike up a hill or something, and you're just exhausting that battery, the battery's going to be a little bit warm. So the last thing it wants to be is even more warm. You know, it needs to be cooled down. The machine is designed to go to a certain level. Most people will never push it to that point, so it's not usually going to be a concern no matter what climate you're in. But it's just a consideration. Lithium batteries do not like temperature extremes. They like temperatures that are stable from like 55 to maybe the highest would be like 80 or 85, but probably more like what your home temperature would be inside your house. So that's where I've been doing. I've been putting them in these bags and taking them inside. I have an electric car, and that car, it's a Tesla, and what it does, it preheats and pre-cools and does all that for the battery to give it, you know, maximum optimum operating and experience, and also to keep everything safer. So there are systems to cool those batteries down in that car, and there's systems to help those batteries to become warmer if it's in a cool environment. You can preheat, you can cool down the battery. So these e-bikes do not have that feature. So you are dependent on keeping, it's kind of like the old Nissan Leafs, you know, they had no protection. So if you're out in a parking lot and it's a sweltering day and you have, you know, a lot of heat out there and you've been pushing it, it might not be a bad idea to let the battery cool down, take it in somewhere, you know, just kind of let it cool down. The same with the cool temperatures. You don't want the battery to expand inside. Really, it's probably going to be okay. I mean, only like 1 in thousands and thousands of these bikes ever ignite and have a fire, but it does happen. So bring the battery in, even if you don't have a bag, but I would recommend a bag if you're going to bring the battery in. Does that make sense? Just to be safe. Yes, it's an added expense. And it just makes sense to keep the battery in the wintertime. When things freeze, they expand, and there could be chemical reactions, and at the very least, your battery's not going to be nearly as efficient if it's 35 degrees or 40 degrees. It's not supposed to get, stay that cold during charging, but when you're riding the bike, of course, you can get away with that for a while. But so just little safety things, something to keep in mind with an e-bike. And I think I've been riding this bike more like a mountain bike, which I guess you really should not do. So I've been taking it into some pretty punishing areas and doing some pretty punishing things with it. So again, I don't know if that contributed to the issue with that front tire or not. But so guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Please like if you enjoyed it. Please follow me, and I will see you in the next video, hopefully. And I hope that someone here could get some valuable information out of this.